My rule of three is what I use to set expectations and manage boundaries with the people in my life, and it makes relationships so much better. It's the number of opportunities that I give people to follow through, to change, and it's also the number of chances that I give myself to change, to move forward, to take action, or to stop doing something. That is what this episode is all about, my rule of three, and how it is the answer to building better relationships with the people in your life. A couple of months ago, I put up a story on Instagram and I shared my rule of three. I shared that I use it with boundaries, advice giving, feedback, and how I use it in my personal life and in my work life. And I got a lot of responses from it. I got a lot of people who were really interested in this idea and who really wanted to see how they could use this idea in their life. And I said that I would do a podcast episode on talking about my rule of three, and that is what this episode is all about. Hoping to keep it short and sweet for you, and I'm excited to hear what you think of it. Hi, I'm Tash Peterson, Certified People Leadership Coach and the host of the Lead with Less podcast. And I'm going to dive into my rule of three because I want people to feel empowered to set expectations, to set boundaries, but also know what their threshold and limit is, to really making sure that these boundaries and expectations are helpful and useful. Because something that I see far too often is people will set boundaries or they'll set expectations and then they'll just get walked over. They don't follow through when things start to not work, when things start to slip. And often that's because they don't have their own threshold. They don't know what their own limit is that helps them to protect their energy and helps them to protect the relationship and the dynamic with themselves or with other people. And so what is my rule of three? It is essentially my 3-strike boundary or expectation that I set with myself and with other people to better navigate the relationship that I have with them. And it's essentially the number of opportunities that I give someone to listen to what I'm saying, to follow through to what I'm expecting, or to create change before I then follow through with the consequence. Now, when we talk about boundaries, it's not about necessarily asking someone to change or telling them they have to change. It is about saying, if this continues or if this doesn't stop, this is what I'm going to do. I'm either going to stop engaging, I'm going to remove myself, I'm going to do this thing. And with expectations, it is about what someone needs to do in order to follow through. But then often as a manager or as a leader in your life, you might not then follow through with those expectations. And so it is the number of opportunities that I give people before I start becoming frustrated, resentful, and angry. And I know that once I start becoming frustrated, resentful, or angry, I am no longer engaging in that relationship in a helpful way or even in a healthy way. And then things start to deteriorate. But over the years, I've really realized what my threshold is. And my threshold has become 3. So 3 times something can either happen, not happen, or continue happening. But each of the times that it does happen, I will communicate, I'll talk about it. But then on the 3rd time, that's it. I will either stop, remove myself, or follow through on what the next thing is going to be that I stated as part of the boundary or as part of the expectation. It's something that I do, like the people in my life know about it. My friends know about it. My family know about it. And when I'm setting expectations with my team or when I'm coaching leaders on how to set expectations with their team, the rule of three actually works with employment law as well. If you look at the proper process for formal performance management, it's 3 strikes and you're out. When I'm talking about the rule of three or when I'm talking about the 3 chances, I'm not talking about, oh, I'm just going to think about this in my head. I'm going to talk about this 3 times with the person that's involved to make sure that they know that this is actually happening. And it's not about something that I keep account of, but it's something that I'm in communication with the other person with. I also use this rule when I'm complaining about something. If I'm complaining about it 3 times, that is a signal for me that this is obviously a fundamental problem or an issue that I need to address. So I either need to make a change, I either need to stop talking about it or complaining about it, or I need to figure out what's next or seek advice or help. I also use this in the context of feedback. In my coaching, I tell people that they get to decide what they do with feedback. So someone could give them feedback and they could not agree with it, or they could not believe that it's valid. But what I've come to learn is that sometimes we invalidate feedback because we don't like it, because we don't want to hear it. And that doesn't mean that it's not valid. the rule that I have with myself is if I hear a piece of feedback 3 times and potentially from 3 different people, I will give it validity. So I will then determine that there is something that I need to pay attention to there and there's something that I need to change there. Then I'm going to implement that feedback, or I'm going to look at what I can implement. Because it can be very easy for people to be like, oh, I don't agree with that. I'm not going to do that. But if there is a common pattern happening, then that is something that needs to be paid attention to. And so, in reverse, when I'm looking at how I engage with other people or how I engage with myself, I also have that rule of 3 with me as well. Fundamentally, I have the rule of 3 to protect my energy and to protect the relationship that I have with myself and with other people. Because when we do not have our own threshold, when we do not have our own line on what we are willing to cross, what we're willing to do, what we're willing not to do, we can get trampled over, we can get walked over, and we then become angry, resentful, and frustrated, which then damages those relationships as well. And this is why I've developed my rule of 3 and why I recommend everyone in your work and your personal life develop your own rule. It doesn't have to be 3. It can be any number that works for you. It can be 2, it can be 4, it can be 5. But I'll also talk a little bit about the number and how to really dictate what the right number is for you. So, how do I use this rule of 3? There's 3 areas that I really use my rule of 3 in. So, the first one is boundaries. So, when I set a boundary with other people, this might be I don't feel comfortable talking about a certain topic. So, this is what my boundary is. If we continue to talk about this topic, I'm going to remove myself and I'm not going to engage. So, that could be the boundary that I'm setting. Now, where my rule of 3 comes in is say this has been a pattern of behavior for this person or this group for a period of time. It's not realistic that I say I'm not comfortable talking about this topic and expect that is just going to change immediately. And so we want to give the opportunity for people to change their behavior if they want to, right? I'm not saying that you have to change. I'm saying that I don't feel comfortable talking about this topic. And if it continues, I'm going to remove myself. But I want to give people the opportunity that they might want to change that behavior or they might want to do things differently to be able to maintain that relationship the way that it is. And I will reiterate my boundary 3 times before I remove myself or stop doing the thing. And so that's my 3 rule coming into play. So say next weekend we're all hanging out together, or next week we're in a meeting and this topic comes up again. I might say, hey, remember when we talked about this? I don't feel comfortable talking about this topic. I don't want to engage in this conversation. Can we please talk about something else? Or I'm going to remove myself. And they might go, oh, yes, sorry about that. I completely forgot. We won't talk about that right now. And so then you carry on with something else. But then 3 weeks later, it might come up again. And then I will reiterate it again. And then on the final time, I'll say, look, I've already spoken about this twice. I've already reminded you twice that this is not a conversation I want to be a part of. I am now going to remove myself and I'm not going to engage in this anymore. And I'm not going to come and participate in these meetings if this is what's going to continue to be the topic of conversation. So that is how the rule of 3 would play out in terms of a boundary. Now, this can be relevant to any boundary that you're setting. Now, the reason why it's important to have some number of opportunities is because it's not easy for people to change what has become a pattern of behavior or a habit, especially if this is something that you've wanted to address for a while, but you haven't. And so now it's a bit ingrained. Now it's become a bit of the norm. And so you need to give people the opportunity to respect that boundary, to follow through with that boundary, and also to give you the opportunity to really reinstate what your boundary is. And for me, it's 3 times because that's the number that works for me right now. It's the number that I've come to realize is a good number for the type of work that I do, the type of people that I interact with, and it just really works well. For you, it might be 2, 4, 5, but I honestly believe that there still needs to be a number there to be able to help you stay firm to what is important to you, but also help you to also give an indication. Actually, in quite a few of my friendships, and this is the next part that I'm going to talk about around advice giving, I actually state this number quite clearly with my friends and like, look, this is the 3rd time I'm talking to you about this. You haven't done anything that I've said the last 2 times, so I'm just not going to talk about it anymore. And I don't want to hear it. And that can sound really blunt, but the truth is that I've already spoken about it twice. So I actually get to be a bit more blunt in the third time because I've given you two opportunities to do something differently, to make a move, to do something. But we need to have that number so that we know what our threshold is. We know what we're willing to tolerate, but then also people can get an idea of the number of opportunities that they have to really think about what they're doing or what they're not doing. So, the other area that I use it in is advice and in coaching. So, this isn't necessarily in my formal coaching relationships where I'm working with someone and they're paying me, and there might be elements of where I need to coach them on things a number of times for them to create change. That's a different dynamic because that is an agreed parameter of what we're there to do. However, I still have a threshold with my paying coaching clients. Like, I'm not going to let you just do the same thing again and again and again and wonder why nothing's changing. I'm still going to hold that line for you so that you can become the best person and the best leader that you can be. But this really comes up when I'm doing more freelance advice or more off the cuff coaching, where because of the work that I do, a lot of people will come and ask questions and maybe come and vent, or maybe they'll come and gossip and complain. And I will allow those conversations to happen 3 times before I put my foot down and say, I'm not engaging this in anymore. Especially if they've asked for my advice, they've asked for my opinion, and I've given it, and they haven't taken it on board. They haven't implemented it. They haven't done anything different, but they're still talking about the same thing. Then I absolutely hold the line on my rule of 3. I'm interrupting this episode to let you know that VIP Leaders, my leadership development program, is currently open for enrollment. VIP Leaders is my signature program that helps you strengthen your leadership identity, build trusted influence, and level up your emotional intelligence to become a leader people actually want to follow. The next round is starting very soon in February 2025. So if you are interested in leveling up your leadership skills, giving you everything that you need to be a leader people actually want to follow, head down into the show notes and click VIP Leaders to find out more. And if you've got questions, reach out and let me know. All right, let's head back to the episode. Because often when I'm getting to that third point, I am frustrated. I'm getting very annoyed. I'm getting very pissed off, which makes me not a nice person. I will say, look, we've spoken about this twice already. I've given you my advice. I've given you my opinion. You haven't done anything, so I don't have anything else to say. And I'll leave it there. And I don't want to hear about it again. And this has worked really well because it's maintained our relationship to not be focused on that frustration. It has also often kicked them up the butt to make a change, because what we allow, we enable, right? So if we allow people to continue to complain and not do anything and not change anything, that we continue to allow that space for them to vent and complain, we're allowing that behavior to continue. And so we need to look at where we're enabling a lot of these behaviors, but then also equally being frustrated and resentful about it. It's not a good place to be. That's not what leadership is. The third area that I use my rule of 3 in is around feedback and expectations. So I will give you feedback and I will reset expectations 3 times before I stop trying or I start formally moving into a formal process. In the work context, in New Zealand employment law, as I mentioned, the performance management process, the dismissal process is a 3-step process. But I often always encourage leaders, make sure you're having these informal conversations before you get to that route to make sure that there's an opportunity for change. Also with expectations, look, I will reset expectations with you. I will follow up on expectations with you 3 times before I determine that there is a lack of commitment, before I determine there's a lack of interest. And when I say follow up and when I say reset, I mean that I'm having these conversations with you. I'm telling you what's going on. I'm telling you what I'm observing. I'm telling you what I'm noticing, giving you the opportunity to talk about that and explain what's going on so that you can create the change if you want to. So I will do that 3 times. I will give you feedback and I'll reset expectations with you 3 times. If we're still not getting anywhere and you don't have good enough reason for us not getting anywhere, we're done. We're not having this conversation anymore. We're moving down very different conversations. We're starting to either disestablish the relationship or we're starting to move down a dismissal process, whatever the context is. It's still the 3 rules. Now, that is how I use it to other people. So that's how I use it in relationships with other people. Now, in reverse, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of how I use this in reverse. I believe that everyone gets the chance to ignore feedback because I don't believe that feedback is black and white. I don't believe that feedback is inherently valid. I believe that everyone gets to determine its validity. But if I've heard that feedback 3 times, or then this is what I tell people, if you've heard the same feedback 3 times in 3 different situations or contexts or from 3 different people, then there is a requirement to listen to that feedback. And that is what I'll do as well. If I've heard feedback 3 times from three different people in 3 different situations, I will absolutely listen to that feedback and implement it because there's obviously a pattern there that I need to pay attention to. And this is something that I see far too often, especially in my friendships, is they'll get feedback and they don't like it, so they'll ignore it. Yet they're getting feedback that's consistent in different situations, which means to me that there is validity there. Because you can't argue that everyone has a problem if it's everyone who's different, right? If you're the common denominator and you're consistently hearing the same feedback, there is something there that you have to listen to. And ignoring it is only going to impact your ability to grow and be effective in the work that you do, to be effective as the leader you want to be. I'm all for people to decide what is valid for them. And it's also your responsibility to listen and to pay attention to patterns. Because if patterns are arising and you are ignoring them, you are doing yourself a disservice, plus you're doing a disservice to the people who are trying to give you that opportunity to grow. That is one thing that I always use my rule of 3 on. And the other thing is that I will allow myself to vent and complain about something 2 to 3 times before I even shut myself off. If I get to venting about this 2 or 3 times and nothing has changed and I'm still venting and complaining about the same thing, I have to stop. Now, I also ask the people in my life to hold me account to that rule. So if I'm coming to you and venting about this 3 times, I want you to hold the line with me. I want you to also hold that rule of 3 with me and say, hey, Tash, you've been complaining about this 3 times. What are you doing? You haven't done anything different. Why is nothing changing? So as much as I use this rule of 3 to build better relationships with other people, I also use this rule of 3 to make sure that I am developing myself, that I am showing up as the best version of myself, because that is so important. So that's my rule of 3. And that's how I use my rule of 3. Now, as I mentioned, you might decide a different number. You might decide 2, 4, 5, 6. What I will say is make sure that it's a number that protects your energy. Make sure it's a number that feels right for you. You might start with 5 because you might be really trying to change what people expect or what's been the norm in these relationships. But then as you get more courageous and more confident in applying your rule, you might realize that 5 is too many. You're starting to notice that energy leak. You're starting to notice that frustration. And so you might pull it back and go, okay, maybe 4 is the better number for me. So then you just test it out. And then you might realize, actually, now that I'm really holding my boundaries, I'm really respecting myself, 3 is actually the better number for me. And so it can tweak and it can change. You don't have to be like, my number is 3 and that's my rule and I'm not changing it. Nothing is set in stone. You always get to change it. You always get to dictate what works for you and what doesn't, as long as you communicate it. If you're using this with other people, make sure that your communication game is strong. Make sure that you are communicating with people so that they can recognize what this rule is and how it works and how it can help develop a better relationship with you. And as always, I wanted to just share some mindset points to help you follow through with your rule if you choose to implement it. The first one is it's up to you to hold your rule. So it's up to you to hold your boundaries and expectations. If you don't do it, no one else will. We can't expect other people to hold our boundaries for us. That's up to us. And this rule can be really helpful for that. The next thing is choose a limit that protects your energy. So I talked about this before. Too many and you'll let your energy leak. Too little and you don't offer the opportunity for people to follow through. You don't offer the opportunity for people to course correct. So play with it. Find out which number really works for you. And you are only responsible for you. You don't control other people, and it's not your job to control them, their actions, their thoughts, their feelings. It's your job to control the way that you show up, the way that you communicate, the way that you follow through on things. So control yourself, control your limits, and establish relationships based on that. Now, implementing this rule of 3 will be harder in established relationships if you're changing established behaviors and established actions. But this rule of 3 can be really impactful in new relationship dynamics. So whether it's a new job that you're going to, a new group of people that you're working with, new friends that you're making, a new relationship that you're stepping into. Applying a new rule in new circumstances and new relationship dynamics is always going to be easier. In those contexts, I would say to actually be stricter with your rule, be more forceful with your rule with new dynamics. But in established dynamics, you might have your threshold be a little bit bigger. You might choose 4, 5, 6 because you're trying to change a current dynamic. So that is what I wanted to share about my rule of 3. I would 100% recommend every single person gets a rule of 3 so that you know what your limit is and you can build relationships based on that. So that is all that I wanted to share with this episode. I really hope it was helpful, and I hope that it gives you an idea about how you can support yourself and support your relationships. Now, you would have also heard in this episode that VIP Leaders is currently open for enrollment. We start in just a week and a half by the time that this episode releases. So if you want to know more about VIP Leaders to build your skill set, to build your identity, your emotional intelligence, and your coaching skills so that you can be a leader that people actually want to follow, make sure you head down into the show notes to find out more about the program and register before we close the doors. I'll be back next week, back in your ears, and have a great week leading as the best leader you can be.